Personally, I mean, it's probably silly to try and identify one favorite software among office softwares, but if I were to pick one, I would honestly have a very hard time picking my favorite office software between Excel and PowerPoint. Personally, I don't use Word all that often, but Excel and PowerPoint are two things that I really, really enjoy using. So, I mean, between the two, it's really hard to pick. So I'm just going to go with both of those things. So Excel and PowerPoint are two softwares that I absolutely enjoy using. So with that backdrop, with that understanding, so we'll start by just taking a look at how we have reached where we are in terms of Excel. So Excel is supposed to have uh, anything between 500 million to about 0.75 billion users in the world, right? That's astounding number, considering the things like PC penetration, things like what people use Excel for. And by all accounts, Excel is sort of a specialized software. It isn't really like your Google Chrome, where even to access Facebook, where just about anyone does it, right? So there are over 1 billion Facebook accounts. So you will need a browser to access Facebook or an app to access Facebook. So Excel is more specialized in that sense. And to get about between half to a 750 million users, I think that figure is absolutely astounding. So like all other things, Excel also had its start in the 80s, in the 1980s. So before Microsoft got into the game, there was a company called VisiCalc. There was a company called VisiCalc who was doing very, very well on DOS systems. So they were really popular. So when Microsoft got into this game in the August of 1982 with a software called Multiplan, unlike Word, that was sort of acqui-hired from outside, Excel was completely developed in-house. So Excel was something that they had developed, or rather, Multiplan was something that they had developed in-house. So they had created this software called Multiplan. Multiplan ran on an operating system called CPM. CPM, it was, I think it stood for Control Programming for Microcomputers. So CPM is what Multiplan ran on. And Multiplan was very, very, very popular, extremely popular, right? So gradually what started happening in the market was that the CPM machines started declining and your DOS-based machines started gaining popularity. DOS-based machines started gaining popularity. Uh, I don't know, some of you are saying voice issues. I don't know. Every day we have that. If Vishal, if you're not able to hear at all, you are probably not connected to the audio. Anyway, so when this DOS-based machine started getting popular, then then Multiplan started losing out. So Multiplan started losing out to this particular software called Lotus 123, which was developed by Lotus Software. So Lotus became one of the biggest pieces of software, one of the most prominent pieces of software for the IBM PC. So gradually, when the market started changing from a character-based spreadsheet onto something more advanced, so a spreadsheet where you could maybe change fonts, maybe change font sizes, and so on, to something which is very simple, just rows and columns with no other change, just text-based, to something more advanced, then Microsoft thought that it's probably a good idea to not bother competing with Lotus at all. Let Lotus remain on the original Lotus 123 kind of a thing. And then they thought that they could develop something which was much nicer. So instead of trying to compete with them in that game, they thought maybe we could develop something much nicer. So that resulted in what we today call as Microsoft Excel. So in the September of 1985, the fag end of September 1985, Microsoft Excel was first launched for Macintosh computers. Once again, no surprises there because Windows was not really there at that time, right? So Microsoft used to be making software for PC-DOS, and the only personal computer of note at that time was your Apple systems like Lisa, etc. So all of the popular softwares from Microsoft actually had their roots in the Macintosh system. We kind of tend to think of as Mac systems as being afterthoughts. We don't really think of as Mac system being the primary thing for Microsoft, but that's how it was. That's what it was back then. So September 1985 is when they launched Microsoft Excel, and it was an unbelievable thing for that time. Imagine this was the first spreadsheet in the world where you could make a character or make a word, make a particular cell bold. You could make a particular cell highlighted, right? So you could make a particular cell, a larger font size. So it was amazing for that time. Those of you who have seen older versions of Tally, so if you've seen older versions of Tally, you will know what I'm talking about. Or for that matter, if you've seen something like a GW Basic, or for that matter, even your command prompt, right? So if you've seen the command prompt on Windows, imagine, or the terminal on Mac, so those of you who are Macintosh users, so imagine if you have rows and columns of data appearing on the command prompt. That is what Lotus 123 was. That is what Multiplan was. And from there, this Excel that was launched in September 1985, obviously it didn't have as many features as we see today, but the basic structure was just the same. There were menus at the top, right? And then there was a cell area in the middle, and then there were the taskbar, etc. at the bottom. So it was just the same. It was fairly modern, and it was astounding for that time. 2 years later, in 1987, Microsoft followed up with a version of Excel for the Windows computer. It was wonderful. This is one of the early advertisements which said the first spreadsheet to make you part of the equation, right? So the biggest selling point at that time was the other spreadsheets, they are just not user friendly. They are there, they look boring, right? So Excel changed all of that. Excel changed all of that. So there were toolbars and there were charts. I mean, of course, there were charts even in Multiplan and Lotus 123, but here you had nice colorful charts. You had 3D charts, you had charts that could be rotated and all sorts of things. So it was wonderful to have a spreadsheet software which was like this. And look at the bar at the top: file, edit, formula, format, data, options. It's crazy how similar it is to today. Of course, there are changes. Of course, things have improved since then. But if you look at it, there's a normal font. There are arrow keys to move. There is an auto sum button. There's bold and there's italic. There are the justification buttons. It was unbelievable for that time. So, so much has been the impact. Such has been the impact of Microsoft Excel on the computer that Mr. Satya Nadella, who's the CEO of Microsoft right now, a couple of years ago, I think in about 2016, he had said that Excel was the best consumer product that Microsoft had ever made. And that's a massive statement to come from the CEO, considering that you would imagine him to say that, a computer operating system such as Microsoft Windows, which probably runs on about 80-85% of computers in the world. And you would imagine that the CEO would say that, yeah, something which is as insanely popular as Windows is the best consumer product that they have ever made. But no, he typically, particularly picks up Microsoft Excel, saying that that's the best consumer product that Microsoft has ever made. And then he goes on to explain a little more. Think about a world without Excel. That's just impossible for me. Honestly speaking, truly speaking, if you ask me, that's probably impossible for me as well. And if you pause to think of how businesses would have run in a world without Excel, that would be pretty much impossible to think for you as well. People couldn't make sense of numbers before. and now everybody can. And that is one of the nicest things about Microsoft Excel. It has brought unbelievable amount of power to the hands of every person. And I do a lot of corporate trainings around business analytics and number crunching. And I always tell them that, look, those of you who are middle managers in corporates, now think of decisions, number based, number driven, numeric decisions that you had to go to a specialist before. Now you don't. You don't really need to go to a specialist, because open your laptop and you've got Microsoft Excel, and all you need to do is just learn a few different things. And 90% of your day-to-day decision making would be far, far better just by using Microsoft Excel, just by learning how to do these things on Microsoft Excel. So that really is the power of Excel, the ubiquity of it, Now, whatever's been, the popularity of it, of Microsoft Excel, and the power that it has given to everyone to optimize, to improve, and to make numeric or number-based decisions. Analytical decision-making process is what we call it. So that really has been the nicest, and that really has been the wonderful thing about Microsoft Excel. So if you were to define what we mean by Microsoft Excel is a spreadsheet tool. It's a spreadsheet tool. So what do we mean by a spreadsheet tool? Back in the day, so 50, 60, 70 years ago, how did they make, how did they do financial accounts? They had these giant notebooks which would open flat, right? So you had these really large notebooks which would open flat. And when you open it, you could it's like a nice large sitting mat. It would be that big, it would spread out. And that notebook would have grids drawn. There would be lines and columns drawn. And, back then people used fountain pens. There were no ballpoint pens. So they used fountain pens, and there would be special fountain pens made for accountants. And that special fountain pen would have two ends, like how you have ballpoint pens which are on two ends. I remember I used to see a lot of these ballpoint pens when I was a kid, which had two ends, and teachers would use the red end to evaluate papers and blue end to write something. So similarly, these accountants back then, they had fountain pens, red ink on one side, black ink on the other side, or blue black ink on the other side. So blue black for your regular entries, and red ink for entries in losses. So losses were written in red, and black or blue black was written in the regular positive entries were written in black or blue black. So that is the concept that was brought into Microsoft Excel. So Microsoft Excel at its core is this huge set of rows and columns. Of course, over the years, the number of rows and the number of columns that has increased, but it still retains some of the features that were there from that time, and because those have become accounting conventions as well. So if you apply the right kind of format, by default, your losses will become red. You do not have to make it red separately. By default, they will become red. So this row and column in Microsoft Excel is what is called a spreadsheet. So that really is what is the basic thing about Microsoft Excel. So when we say how many rows and how many columns now, right now we have millions of rows. So there are millions of rows right now. I think right now the current Excel version 365 that I'm using, I don't remember the exact number, but I think it has about 16,300 odd columns and about 1 million rows, a little over 1 million rows. Okay, so a little over 1 million rows multiplied by 16,000 columns. And you multiply those two, and the product that you get would be the number of cells that Excel has. All right, and that is talking about just one worksheet. From there, you can have multiple worksheets. So you see how powerful Excel is. But let's try and, just like how we did for Word, let's try and understand, let's familiarize ourselves with the parts of an Excel window. Now, one thing to remember is that there are many parts that are common with Microsoft Word. Okay, because they are the same family of software, which is the reason why many of the parts are common. They are shared commonly. So I'm not going to repeat the parts that are common. For example, you can see at the top there is a ribbon. There's a ribbon. So I'm not going to repeat these kind of parts because they are common to Microsoft Word and Excel and PowerPoint. So of course, the ribbon menu items will be different. That's a different issue, and we'll get familiar with the menu items as we work along, but we are not going to repeat the parts that are common as such. So the primary component in Microsoft Excel is a cell. All of these individual rectangles are cells, right? So what is a spreadsheet? A spreadsheet is nothing but a large collection of cells. Okay, so there are many cells. Each cell can hold something. Each cell can hold some data in there. Okay, so that's really what a cell is, and that's really what a cell does. This is called your name box. Okay, so what you have over there is what is called a name box. So we'll see how to use a name box, but by default, a name box will tell you where your selection currently is. Right now, my selection is in column AD, row 38. Okay, so what Excel follows is something called row column addressing scheme. Okay, and we learn more about the addressing scheme. So name box will give you, now let's just remember, name box will give you the position of the selection on your screen. There are other things that a name box can do, and we'll see those as we move along. The third thing is this entire white space that starts from here all the way till the end. That is the formula bar. That's a formula bar. So whatever is the formula that you are entering, you will enter on the formula bar. So even if you think that you are entering it on a cell, it will automatically also get added onto the formula bar. So all formulas will get entered in the formula bar. Of course, they can be parallelly entered into the cell as well, but the primary area of entering formulas is the formula bar. These horizontal selection of cells is called row. A horizontal selection of cells is a row. So you see the rows are numbered 1, 2, 3, 4. So row 1 is this entire thing horizontally, row 2, row 3, row 4, and so on. The other thing that goes vertically is the column. So columns are given names such as A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and so on. And then once you finish Z, then it again starts A, B, A, C, A, D, and so on. And then you finish, then again it will start with 2 more, and then with 3 letters, and so on. So that's how you have all of your rows. And numbers are, of course, straightforward. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way up to 1 million, 1.05 million rows. So now, what else do we have on the screen? These are called worksheets. These are called worksheets. So by default, when you open, there is a sheet 1. By default, when you open, there's a sheet 1. So you can have multiple worksheets, sheet 2, sheet 3, sheet 4, and so on. And you can rename these worksheets. How many worksheets can an Excel file have? Unlimited. So there is no real limit to how many worksheets an Excel file have. The only limit that applies is not really a software side limit, it's a hardware side limit. So the limitation comes from the amount of RAM that your computer has. If your computer has plenty of RAM, then you can go on adding as many as you can handle. Because remember, all of that will have to be loaded onto RAM. So that really is the only limitation. So if you think about a book, right, an old accounts book. Now, what does any book comprise of for that matter? All books will comprise of sheets of paper. And I also said that these Excel files are trying to simulate that sheet of paper on which accounts were kept, the grid line sheet of paper. So no surprises that these are called sheets. They are called sheets. Okay. So when you have multiple sheets together, what do you call that? You obviously call that a book, right? Multiple sheets are together called a book. So Excel, when we say Excel file, we are typically referring to an Excel workbook. Okay, the technical term of what we colloquially say as an Excel file is actually an Excel workbook. The technical term for this sheet that you see in number 6 circled here at the bottom is a worksheet. So because this is a book, so you see the default name here is book 1. That is the default name over here. That's book 1. Right. So this is called a workbook. So we might want to call this that this is a file. We can say that this is a file, but then by the technically correct term for that would be to say that this is a workbook. All right. And then over here, if you see the last thing over here, if you see, there are these worksheet views. We'll again see how to use views as we go along. They are very helpful when you're trying to print Excel files. So we'll take a look at how these are going along. Again, next to that, there is a zoom control. I did not mention zoom control because we've already covered that before in Word. There are all of these ribbon elements which we will do as we go along.